Take a crowd of 20,000 to your home patch and give them a spectacular view of the racing. And then ask the local team whether they feel the pressure. For the Emirates Great Britain team with skipper Fletcher and strategist Hannah Mills, they knew after 48 hours they'd either be taking the praise or taking the rap. As SailGP kicked off in Portsmouth. It's been 3 years since SailGP was last here in Portsmouth, and in that time the circuit has grown massively. There are now 12 teams, 14 events per season, plus an ever-expanding list of the world's top sailors, where an Olympic gold medal or a World Championship title seems like the entry level. But the odd thing is that in creating a racing series that can not only be watched remotely, but is controlled at arm's length by the organisers, the expansion of the infrastructure has gone largely unnoticed, until, that is, you visit a venue for real. Then the scale of SailGP hits home. The spectator grandstand here in Portsmouth is the biggest I've seen, and there's no doubt that the circus has rolled into town. At the midway stage, the season points board is also tighter than we've seen for years, with the top 3 teams separated by just 3 points, with Spain, Australia and New Zealand all currently on the podium. The British are 4th, just 5 points off the lead. And for Fletcher, it was clear that this event would bring the added pressure of expectation from the large home crowd. Being the home team, there'd be a lot of talk about home advantage and the rest of it, but I guess the irony is that actually you get so little time to practice that I guess maybe there isn't home advantage.
I don't think there's a home advantage in terms of knowing the waters here. I've certainly never really sailed here. I've spent a lot of time, in the Solent at Stokes Bay and everything, but we're on quite a different race course, and there's not really, I think we're going to know anything else more than the others. But I do think that we're hoping to harness the energy from the fans and really, let that, although there's a lot of pressure, there's also a lot of excitement to have those fans and the opportunity we've got this weekend.
I mean, this area is notorious for its tide, but at the speed you're sailing at, does that really play a factor in it?
Yeah, the tide certainly does play a reasonable factor. We're sailing on, I think it's neaps, and it's not too strong. I mean, we're in New York where there was 2 or 3 knots of current, for example, and it was cross tide, which is obviously very problematic with all your wind gear and everything. So hopefully here it's not too big a factor.
How much are you using the Oracle Cloud to actually go and look at what other teams do? Is that sort of a regular part of your process?
Yeah, we spend quite a lot of time looking at data. We've got a performance analyst who works on that, and we use the Oracle Cloud, but we also do our own analysis, have our own tools, and we've been looking at that a lot given the lack of training time, along with just the traditional looking at the videos, the onboards, the comms, what the other team's doing. There's nowhere really to hide, so yeah, we try and take every gain we can. But what all the teams were in agreement on was figuring out how they're going to cope with the wide variations in the forecast. Heat, sun, rain, thunder, lightning, flat calms and 27 knots. They were all in the forecast somewhere. The practice racing was non-existent though, as the wind refused to show. But on race day 1, at least there was breeze, around 10 to 12 knots. Crew were down from 6 to 5, the 24-metre rig was in use, and the new T-foils were fitted. But before the first race had started, there was drama, as the French top section of the mast collapsed. The crew were all fine, but given the major problems that SailGP has had with the wingmast this season, this will have caused serious concern.
Yeah, we were during the training session before the races, we were on a straight line upwind, standbying for attack, and I think Kevin and Manon were leeward, preparing for the new attack, and I just dropped the board, and a few seconds after the wing collapsed. So the first feeling was, I was really surprised, honestly, because it was not that windy, probably 11 knots, and I was not thinking about possible collapsing wing in these conditions. So when I saw the wing just going down, I was like, this is not possible. And yeah, just after that, just looking for my teammates, making sure that nobody was injured, and yeah, it's unfortunate.
In spite of the pressure on the opening race, the British stormed around the course to make winning look easy. A good start, clear breeze, good tactics, and their first win was in the bag. Behind them it was tighter, with the Kiwi Blackfoils and Denmark fighting it out for second and third. This time it was the Italians who led from the start, but this was not going to last. By the bottom gate they were second to the Swiss, and by the next top gate the British had pushed through into second, which is how this race ended up.
One, running up here. Big right here. And not here. Big press, big press. Okay, good. Step fast, step fast. Fast mode. I will. Really get pressure. Pressure, head up. Go wheel. Let's slow up. Good job, guys. Nice one.
This time it was the Kiwis that slipped the clutches of the fleet to run away with a win. The Swiss were there again with a second, and the British fought back to get third.
And Flo, you win. 2 boards.
For the fourth and final race of the day, Tom Slingsby and his crew on Bond's Flying Ruse reappeared where they'd been missing up until now, at the front. They got the best start, led and never gave it back. But behind them in second it was the Brits and then the Italians.
Keep coming, angle.
All of which meant that you didn't need a calculator to figure out that with a 1-2-3-2, the home team, Emirates Great Britain, were the most consistent and were clear leaders by the end of the first day. 6 points ahead of the Swiss in second and 10 ahead of the Australians and Kiwis. Day one had been a dream start for Fletcher and his crew. One of the aspects that continues to impress me is the development of technology aboard the boats and behind the scenes. You could argue that being one designs, there's no need to continually develop once you've designed a formula that works. But that's never been the view of founder and CEO Russell Coutts. Some of the latest developments that are underway are seriously impressive and could well be a game changer for the sport.
One of the fascinating things about SailGP is that you seem to be doing what I don't know any other event that does it, where you're a one design class and you're constantly developing and leading design and technology. I mean, clearly that's still a very important part to you because you're still developing the boats.
Well, it's important to enhance the product. You know, for example, in light winds, when the boats fall off the foils and stop in the water, you don't get the same movement on screen, and the racing, you know, it can be quite dull. So there's a huge focus from us in improving the light wind performance. So as you probably know, we've got the new light wind foils that were tested yesterday again, that are coming on stream for Geneva, and then the new
they T-foils, are they?
They're T-foils, but they're completely different shape to what the high-speed foils are. And then we have the new light wind rudders, which I think will make an even bigger difference than the foils. You know, you won't see the boat, the back of the boat or the stern of the boat fall into the water during a manoeuvre like you typically do with the big wing on. We have we're using the 29.5 metre wing and light winds, and we've because you see the performance and you see the drag difference between the 24 metre wing. We've got when the boat's foiling, we've got a new component coming out that'll be a 27.5 metre wing, which we think is going to be quite a nice sweet spot for that when the boat gets up and foiling in light winds. Slightly lighter, obviously, than the 29.5 metre wing as well. So that's going to be, I think, a really good innovation. And then, one of the advantages with the F50, of course, is it was designed to be modular to ship it around the world. But what that really means is that we can build, for example, new cross beams. We can build new hulls in the future without, and the league can continue, the racing can continue without having to replace the whole boat, which is hugely wasteful, hugely costly, and frankly wouldn't be practical for us as well. Whereas we can, for example, narrow the beam of the boat and stick the hulls out, cant the hulls out, the foils out further, and that would lighten the boats. Or we could create new hulls, or we can reduce the drag on the platform and so forth in stages, rather than having to chuck the whole thing away. Or, as we've done with the wing, you can build new components in the wing and improve certain aspects of the performance. So that's it's all about making the product compelling and making the racing compelling. That's what drives us. It's not really just going faster. It's whatever's going to make the racing better. For example, I think one of the big innovations over the next season will be the propulsion system.
I was going to ask you about that. Tell us about that, because that sounds really interesting. I mean, that's quite game changing.
Yes, it is a game changer. So we tested it in New York, just a fixed strut with we were testing just the jet propulsion system.
Right, so just explain what this new propulsion system will be.
It's a jet engine made in collaboration with Hamilton Jet in New Zealand and HX3 in the States, and so that is a pretty amazing, pretty cool looking system actually. So the idea being that, and that will be lowered on a strut and retracted into the boat. The test that we did in New York was just a fixed strut, because we were just simply testing the propulsion and the angle of the propulsion system and so forth. The boat foiled in 3 knots of wind. So it's a game changer.
Really?
Yeah, well, as soon as the boat gets up, and with the new foils, the drag's a lot lower than with the old foils, so the boat just falls along beautifully.
And so the idea is to get the boats up onto the foils, and then they can, a bit like we saw in that other event, the America's Cup, where they were towing boats up onto the foils.
Yeah, except we'll have rules around when you can do it. So the idea being, we'll get the prototype into boat 13, so it will have the retractable case and so forth inside the centre pod, and we'll test that further. No doubt there'll be some further tweaks, and then we'll implement it into the fleet. And then after those tests, we will get precise numbers on all aspects of the performance. Then we'll test that virtually, and then create the rules around its usage. So I can imagine the restrictions being, you have to be at a worse sailing angle than what you would be if you were sailing to get up on the foils. Otherwise you can't use it. And you won't be able to, for example, go into the wind or directly downwind. There'll probably be a restriction on the number of uses, for sure. So you still have to be strategic about when you use it. If there's more wind on one part of the course, you probably won't choose to use it at those times. If there's less wind on a part of the course, you might be able to dig into that slightly deeper and then use it, and then exploit the better wind longer, for example. So that I think it'll still be hugely strategic, but we we've got an idea about what those rules, what the concept of those rules will be, but the refinement of those rules will take some time, I think.
And presumably the objective is to make sure that you don't have these big gaps where people drop off the foils and there's huge gaps between those that
Well,
are
we
foiling
still
those that
want
aren't.
to make it obviously we want to retain the skill factor. You know, it's got to be the results have got to be aligned to who's the most skillful. So you're still going to have to read the wind on the water and decide when to use it and so forth. But it will stop those times when the fleet drops off the foils and they're just sitting there almost stationary, you know. And even though they might be doing 7 or 8 knots of boat speed, on screen it just looks like there's no movement at all, you know. So that's, and we know from our audience figures that's not as compelling to the wider audience, because, you know, our fan base isn't just avid sailors. That's only about 15% at most of our audience. You know, most of them are actually racing fans. Traditional racing fans make up the bulk of the SailGP audience. So I think the racing fans will love this. It's you obviously just got to look at what Formula One did with the drag reduction system.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds like
the
DRS.
It's well, in effect, it's a drag reduction system because you're getting up on the foils. You know, so that's in effect, you know, what it is. I think it's going to have a dramatic positive influence on the light wind product, and as will some of the other innovations we're doing. So, yeah, exciting times.
So going into the second day, there was plenty of pressure for the Brits. They might have been a fair way ahead of their competition, but again, that pressure of expectation was going to be bearing down on them. The other thing that was different on the second day was that the breeze was up. Started off quite feisty. The gusts are actually getting up into 20 knots. This was before racing. Actually, as we got closer to racing, the breeze started to drop down and we got to an absolutely perfect day with about 15, 16 knots of breeze. Flat sea state, what more could you want? So, race 5, how did it go? Well, it was pretty interesting, because the Kiwis decided to deliver a masterclass in sailing off the front of the fleet, holding the lead and making it all look, well, pretty easy. Of course it wasn't, because behind them there was a scrap and a half in pretty much everywhere you looked on the course. But at the end of that race, the Canadians, Giles Scott, who got themselves into second, they found their form today, certainly in the first race, and then it was Emirates Great Britain that came in third, with the Australians, Tom Slingsby, in fourth. Straight on to race 6. Conditions had slightly moderated a tiny bit, but not a great deal, so it was still another set of champagne conditions for these guys. And it was the French this time, having had their disappointment on Saturday with losing the top of their mast. It had been worked over all night down the road in the SailGP Technology Centre, only a few miles from here, down the M27, and there they were out with a repaired wing. They just smoked off the front and won the race. Followed very closely by the Italians, who also put in a very impressive performance. And guess who was third? Yep, it was Dylan Fletcher once again. In race 7, once again, it was the Kiwis that muscled their way to the front of the fleet in a frenetic first leg and then stretched their lead throughout the race to take another fairly comfortable win. Behind them was the French and then the Canadians. The British weren't there. The British had a problem. They had a problem with a technical problem with lifting and dropping dagger boards. In fact, they had problems all day with this. And they weren't in the race, that particular race, but it didn't matter. They got themselves so far in front, they were in the final anyway. So at the end of race 7, this meant that the 3 boats that were going into the final were the Brits, the Kiwis and the Swiss. Now, if you've watched enough SailGP finals to be of the mind that actually what happens is that the first boat to get clear air and get through the leeward gate first is the one that wins the race, you are going to be disappointed, because this final was very different. It was nip and tuck right from the start, especially between the Swiss and the Brits, who had a right old ding-dong down to the leeward gate. It was the Swiss who held the advantage there, forcing the Brits to go around the opposite mark on the right-hand side and go up the less favoured side of the course. And by the time they got to the top, it was certainly the less favoured. The Kiwis and the Swiss have both got through the Brits, round they went. However, on the second lap, the Brits managed to muscle their way through into second. They were on the charge up to the Kiwis. The trouble was that the Kiwis had pulled out quite a decent lead, and in a short race like this, it is very difficult indeed to make up that distance, which indeed they didn't. In the end, the Kiwis crossed the line comfortably ahead of the Brits to take a very well-deserved victory. The Brits are in second and the Swiss third.
What do you think we should take out of this? Because this season looks like the most competitive we've ever seen so far, with quite a tight grouping at the top of the fleet, new people at the front of the fleet as well. What's your read on it? Where do you go from here with it?
Well, I think SailGP's always been super competitive. But yeah, this season obviously there's a bit of a split between the kind of people that have consistently performed at the right end or been a little bit further back. You know, it's obviously great to see, you know, Swiss getting into their first final. They've always looked reasonably comfy as soon as we switched to the T-foils. So it's been cool to see them actually kind of achieving that milestone. But I think you still see the Aussies, you know, consistently strong. The British obviously had a few wobbles, but consistently strong. You've got a feel for the French this weekend. You know, they would have really enjoyed those conditions. I would have expected to see them right up the front. But I think it shows you if you make a mistake, you have a bad event. You know, we made a mistake and then boat shut down in Sydney and ended up with an 8th. And you know, the Spanish have been on absolutely amazing form and made a mistake this weekend and have a tough event. So it's all about just making sure you keep being consistent in the right end of the field.
In the first few minutes or even seconds of that last final race, there was a lot going on. You managed to squeak your nose ahead, then they seemed to jibe inside you and get the advantage, and then it went a bit pear-shaped out the gate. Talk us through what was going on there.
Yeah, we just couldn't quite roll them on the reach, and then due to the race course here, we kind of always knew we weren't going to be on the back foot. We wanted to take the right turn, but it was a bit difficult with them, and then they had an issue and kind of got forced basically around the left mark, and we didn't want to go that way. And as soon as we went that way, we were like, oh god, we're going to be deep. But we kind of knew that if we went the right turn, I'm sure they would have held us out, pushed us off foil penalty. So it felt like we were between a rock and a hard place. In hindsight, we probably should have slowed down, but yeah, like I said, really proud of the overall performance and how we came back well all weekend.
Obviously you would have loved to have won, but it was an outstanding performance on the weekend. Do you feel a sort of sense of relief at that as well? Because you were dealing with the pressure well on Friday, but it would have been there surely.
Yeah, we felt the pressure all weekend, and I think that especially really proud of the team today with the technical issues and coming back, like starting late and all sorts of things. So I think that we've got to take this as a big win. We've struggled at the last two events to come here in front of the home crowd with the pressure on and win the fleet racing and be second here. We're I think 1 point now off the top 3, so if we sail like that at every event, we're going to be in good shape.
We're really, really proud of how the team sailed this weekend. It was a big step forward for us from the US events where we were struggling a little bit in lots of different areas. Just those small things at this level make such a difference, and so the goal this weekend was to come out and try and hit a lot of those things and make them better, and we feel like we did that, which was great. Obviously making the finals the first step, which we did, and then it was such a tight final in many respects, and just a couple of little things not quite going to plan or our way, unfortunately couldn't get the win.
And tactically, talk us through some of the key sort of tactics this weekend.
I think we were just trying to get the splits. You know, if you're clear and free and you can sail the boat fast, then life is generally pretty good. And so for us, it's always picking the right moments to split. You know, if you can get that opportunity and make it work when the bias on a gate isn't too big or whatever it is that you're doing, you're always trying to constantly weigh up the decisions of, you know, do I take the split and take the slightly worse bias, or do I follow around and, you know, sit in dirt? So yeah, you're just balancing that, and I think we did a really good job when we were in the pack of managing that.
And talking of in the pack, I mean, you kept pulling yourself out of the pack, and we don't see that very often in SailGP at all. I mean, how are you doing that?
We felt fast this weekend for sure, and that always makes you feel pretty confident in terms of, you know, being around other boats and burning other boats off. And the manoeuvres were really slick from the team today. I think everyone was doing such a good job in you know, just sailing the boat really, really solidly, and really clear communication on board, which was nice. And so, yeah, it was just felt good.
But aside from the super smooth performance from the Kiwis and a very impressive performance from the Brits, where they seem to dig themselves out of the pack time and time again to finish in the top 3, the other standout performance was of Sebastian Schneider's Swiss team. This is the first time they got into the final, and we're starting to talk about this a fair bit as we go through this season, teams that are getting to the final for the first time. It's an indication of just how close and intense SailGP is becoming.